Welcome to our webinar on building community for post-secondary students, presented by the Town and Gown Association of Ontario. And today I'm joined by a stellar panel of folks in the Town and Gown space. So starting in the order with which we'll discuss things today, I'm joined by Bradley Clarke, who is the Director of Student Life and Experience at Brock University. Following him will be Landon Tulk, the Chief Operating Officer of Amplify Solutions. And then following him will be Jenna Phillips, the founder of Clear the Air Initiative and a University of Waterloo student. And then wrapping everything up will be Kathryn Hofer, who is the Director of Student Life at the University of Guelph. And so we're really excited to have you all here with us today. And so the Town and Gown Association of Ontario is designed to create thriving, vibrant communities between post-secondary institutions and their municipal and neighborly partners. We are a network organization that tries to collate best practices and mediate relationships in a way that creates positive and impactful connections between everyone. So we're really excited here to share some insights, COVID and un-COVID related, on how to build community among post-secondary students. So I will turn it over to Bradley Clarke to lead us off. And Brad, I think you also have a presentation for us.
Yes, thank you so much, AJ, and good morning, everyone. Really nice to spend some time with folks this morning. Speaking of partnerships and connections, and it's no better time than now for us to stick together. And what I'm going to share with you this morning is really some of the best practices and contextual learnings that we have gained at Brock. I'm going to share my screen that will give some visuals and some kind of diversified content beyond just you all looking at me speak for the next few minutes. But I'm certainly, as I mentioned, glad to spend some time with you this morning. Give me half a moment to share my screen. Okay. AJ, can you confirm that I'm good? Okay. So as AJ mentioned, my role at Brock is as the Director of Student Life and Success. And the images you see on this screen here represent some of the activities that we're involved in Student Life and Success. Again, focused on helping students to make the most of their Brock experience, both within the classroom, but also beyond it. And as I'm sure many on this call will appreciate, by beyond it, we mean not just outside the classroom in other spaces on campus, but most certainly as taking a kind of an active role in making the communities that we are part of beyond the campus better, whether that be at the local, regional, provincial, Canadian, or even international level. So it's a great role. I often say to others, I have the best job on campus, and that holds true even at times of year like this when neighborhood relations issues may be more prevalent. Again, you take the learnings and you keep going. And I think one of the things that's really a good thing for Brock is that we've made a lot of positive steps over the last 15 to 18 years that I've been involved in the Town and Gown type of work towards integrating the university and our communities. Okay, so just a bit of context for you. For folks who have been to our campus, this image might be familiar. For those who have not yet visited Brock, you're always welcome. Please come and join us. You might know that Brock is located in the city of St. Catharines, sort of at the center of the Niagara region. But our main campus actually straddles two municipal boundaries, separating the city of St. Catharines and the city of Thorold. This picture, if you look to the right-hand side, you'll see Sir Isaac Brock Way, which is that municipal boundary. So to the top part of the upper right picture is the city of St. Catharines, and immediately below that, continuing to the south, the city of Thorold. We're also a 10-minute drive away from the city of Niagara Falls and the city of Welland, as well as the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake. And Welland and Niagara-Lake are also host to the Niagara College campuses. So again, a very unique dynamic for us in Niagara, multiple municipalities, multiple institutions, a regional government, more than 10 mayors, more than 10 town councils, lots to navigate when it comes to town and gown. The university was founded in 1964, which means there are still many people in our community who were here before Brock was, and that's also something to keep in mind as we navigate issues. The university has grown significantly over the last 10 to 15 years. We're at 19,000 plus students this fall. We have about 2,500 residence beds, and about 20% of our students are from Niagara, the rest are from beyond, heavily drawing on the GTA, for example. In the questions that we were considering as we prepared for, looks like I'm, there we go. As we prepared for the speak today, one of the things I chose to focus on was understanding how we build links between our institution and the local community in such a way that promotes safe, thriving, and vibrant communities. As I mentioned, it's unique perhaps to Brock and to Niagara that if we think about it from the municipal context, that's replicated multiple times for us. Again, I think what we've learned is actively participating in town and gown efforts is really where it starts. AJ mentioned the Town and Gown Association of Ontario, and certainly Brock and the city of Thorold were founding members of that group back in the early 2000s, along with many others. Again, town and gown meetings are special for us. We sit on a town and gown council for the city of St. Catharines, and one for the city of Thorold, and one for the city of Welland, and one for the town of Niagara Lake. So, things happen in replicate sometimes, but it also gives us a chance to hear different vantage points from across the region, and also to be a kind of a common point that pulls those groups together. Meaningful partnerships is really critical, and so I'll give some examples as we go through the session this morning of how Brock is work with our community partners to do that. The second or third point there, step forward when things don't go well, and step back when they do, is really thinking about, when you're in this work, you're in it for the common good, and so you don't point fingers when things are not going smoothly, and you certainly take responsibility at those times. And sometimes it's better to share the success when things are going well, but of course important not to rest on our laurels. This is a continuous effort spanning years. Some really interesting Brock examples I think that relate to this particular case. We have a formal off-campus living and neighborhood relations office that was founded in 2003, and so, as I said, I've been involved in this neighborhood relations and town and gown work ever since. Over the years, we've hosted a number of symposiums and conferences. Just 2 years ago, we hosted a national conference, Building Bridges, which was a great way for our community partners and students, staff, and faculty to understand this issue from the perspective of other partners across Ontario and across the country. I'll work into examples of, as we talk later on in the session, about our off-campus patrol and our staffing support for the Niagara Regional Police Service. Again, that's becoming more common now, but was somewhat unique when we launched, where we took those steps about 5 years ago. And then recognizing that there are all sorts of ways that students get involved in the community that are very, very positive. And so through the Student Life and Success Department, the work that we do around community connections, student volunteerism, and service learning, again, I think really helps to balance things off and to show our students that the community is a great place to spend their time and energy. As far as where I think town and gowns communities are going in the future and what are the emerging trends, again, I think this current context of the pandemic has given us kind of maybe that disruption that was necessary in order to push our student supports into the virtual realm. I think that is a silver lining for this whole difficult circumstance that we're all navigating now. When we do get back to the point of being more face-to-face in our operations, I think a lot of these virtual supports are going to continue. Many universities, and Brock is no different, have really dedicated themselves to increasing opportunities for experiential learning. And again, I think that gives a currency for our students' involvement. Again, academic credit is always valuable, and in a lot of ways, students are time poor, and so making the most of the time that they do have to contribute by providing academic currency for their effort is important. Altruism can only really go so far. And then I think the other emerging trends, and we've seen some recent announcements of this happening, is universities establishing satellite locations in distinct and distant communities. And so as we continue to move in that direction, the town and gown relationships that we might have in our primary communities need to be extended and replicated, duplicated, and strengthened and broadened across those new communities. I think that's going to be really important. Virtual and online communities, again, is a point of strength for us. This pandemic has given us a reason to expand these even further since this past beginning of this past term. And so I've put a link here in the presentation. I would encourage everyone, if you have some time to visit that link and learn some of what we've been doing at Brock since this past September, actually more so since this past summer, to support our students in virtual and digital means. VU for You is a really dynamic program that I think is a game changer in a lot of ways. And so again, whether it's helping students with academic readiness, virtual engagement communities, so that all of our incoming class has been associated with a small group, 30 or so students, and a set of senior leaders who will guide them. Again, that's a new thing for Brock, but it really makes our first year experience a universal one, whether a student is living on campus or off, whether they're in Niagara or, again, connecting to us from all around the world right now. They all have that common support network. And I think that's been very, very helpful. And then the last point before I hand off to my colleagues is just thinking about the role of businesses, and I'm sure that Landon and others will focus on this. But to me, I think it's really a significant role for the business community to reinforce the value that students bring to the community as they return from afar. To set the tone each cycle, and September is a great time for this sort of thing, to welcome students back and make them feel a part of the community they're either returning to or joining for the first time. And then I think the last point that I'll make is universities are complex places. I think everyone recognizes that. We need to make it easier for the business communities and for others in our extended communities to connect with us. I think right now we have, and Brock I think is not unique here, but we have so many front doors that it's almost impossible to figure out where to go to start a partnership. And we really need to do a better job of clearing that up for folks, because again, I think these connection points they're natural, but that first step is always the hardest. And so as we move forward, making it easier to create partnerships, and on the university side, understanding, in complex organizations where all these partnerships might exist or even be existing in silo, I think is an important part. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it back to you, AJ, and work my examples into other parts of the presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Brad. Really engaging and insightful. And I just want to remind folks, we are using the Q&A function today. So if you do have a question for a particular presenter, please put it in the chat and we'll try and get to that either in between or towards the end. But I'm really excited to now welcome Landon. And I think, Brad, you set up Landon really well on this concept of what businesses and brands can do in the post-secondary space. And I think something that often isn't discussed in the town and gown area a lot is the role of these more commercial enterprises in it. So Landon, I'd love to hear your perspective from the Amplify Solutions side of things.
Thanks, AJ. Super happy to be here. And like you just pointed out, I'm very excited to follow up on what Bradley just said, because it's such a good segue into what I think the broader industry and business community, which encompasses the not-for-profit community as well, to engage with campuses. But first and foremost, I do actually want to thank Bradley, his team, and the folks that are working in his space, because as a recent graduate, I think entering industry, the only reason I'm prepared to do so is because I had experiences outside of the classroom. And I think in my work at Amplify Solutions, we're seeing more and more that millennials, Gen Z, and students are interested in building more than just an academic skill set. And PSE, post-secondary institutions, are such a big piece of what that looks like for students. So there's sort of two sentiments that I want to share with the group today. But first, I'll just kick off a little bit about sort of who I am and Amplify Solutions. So I'm a recent grad from Western University. And in my time at university, I sort of had two unique experiences that enabled me to get to grow and work with the community of London, the province of Ontario, and sort of broader regional landscapes. And that was one, leading the student council at Western University, and two, building a student startup about 4 years ago. Myself and a few other Western students built a marketing agency that works with brands and organizations to connect them to students in Gen Z, which is still proving to be a unique challenge for many out there. But there's sort of two things that I share coming from those hats with this group that I think are really relevant to the roles that businesses and brands can play in the town and gown placemaking sort of setting. And that's that, this year represents such a different opportunity for us to engage with students in the broader community. And that while I think many of us wear a hat that it's going to be difficult to do this with some sort of virtual context and non-physical conventional way to connect, there's such a great thing ahead of us. And that's that students' routines and young people's routines have been so vastly disrupted that when there's disruption, there exists points of potential entry for new people in the community to engage with crowds that have been otherwise hard to connect with. So that's been a lot of the conversations that me and my team have been having with organizations, is that, while COVID is presenting certainly unique challenges in terms of community building, there's a great flip side to this, which is that there will be new ways to engage with students who for once are breaking from their regular routines. So I say that in a very positive way. I'm excited about what the future of community building looks like for students and communities. And secondly, one piece that I think is so pivotal to this is the way that campuses, communities, cities, and sort of the fourth C, which is companies, connect, needs to be more defined. I think there are very conventional ways that commercial enterprises have been engaging with campuses, whether it's through scholarships, very limited academic or sort of student experience programming, or starting to form some sort of partnership, and then hiring and talent is sort of the other big piece that companies engage with campuses. But companies and industry are looking for more, and particularly from the startup space. Engaging with the PSE sector and campuses is not easy to do. So to echo what Bradley had previously said about, where do we begin these partnerships? The puzzle is equally as challenging on the other side. When you're engaging with institutions that are so large, where do you even begin? So the message I want to share today is that I think moving forward, industry and the local economy need to be bigger pieces of the student experience in some of those non-conventional ways. And I want to look specifically at how they can be a part of building communities, whether it be digital or physical. And the last piece I'd sort of integrate into that is the sort of social justice perspective that I think also needs to be shared, in that the workplace is sort of one of these foundational things in our society that needs to change and start to reflect our communities a little bit more. But particularly for small and medium sized enterprises, that's a little bit harder said than done, because they don't have as many best practice sharing communities, and they don't have as many ways to engage with their peers in the industry to fully understand, what do I need to do to start changing some of my practices. And I actually think students can be an interesting voice in some of those communities, whether it be through local chambers of commerce or local economic development corporations, to start prompting ideas in the small and medium-sized business space about how we can change what the workplace looks like. So these are some of the ideas that I hope to share, but I'm super thrilled to be a part of this panel, and excited to see where this conversation goes.
Great. Thank you, Landon. And I think, your last point there on social justice and the need for the workplace to change leads us right well into Jenna. And so, Jenna, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about Clear the Air and some of your organizing work around climate action among university students.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, AJ. And I think, Landon, what you were saying really speaks well to, the student perspective. And as an undergraduate student myself, I think that there's so much potential in bringing students into the workplace and into those business-like decisions. So that's amazing. So a bit of background on myself. I am the founder of Clear the Air, which is an online platform that seeks to educate, inspire, and mobilize youth to take climate action. So I started this back in 2017 when I was first beginning my undergraduate degree, and I was realizing that the information that was available about climate change and environmental issues was very complex, and it could be very political and confusing and controversial and just difficult to understand if you didn't have an academic background and you didn't know really how to break down information and understand the biases that go behind different statements and things like that. And I found that really frustrating that you needed so much background and experience to understand this information. And so I wanted to convey that information to young people like myself and even younger individuals, because climate change will impact everyone, especially future generations. So I wanted to make that information clear and understandable and then relevant to those individuals' lives. So I created a blog called Clear the Air, which I write about different climate change and environmental topics in very clear language. And then I also relate it to the individual life. And then I show steps on how you can take action in your personal life to create positive change. And I really try to emphasize the power of the individual action to contribute to global collective action, and to show you that climate change really isn't as doom and gloom as you think it is, and you do have the power to make a change when everyone works together. And on top of that, I've also been a part of another local organization called Youth Action on Climate Change, and that has been an organization working in Guelph and Waterloo that seeks to bring young individuals together and create positive change against climate change in their local communities. So working with the businesses, the municipal governments to create projects surrounded in food waste and active transportation, and really integrating youth into the community-based solutions that we need to create action. And so through my different experiences, so I have the blog, I've been working with Youth Action on Climate Change, and I actually just started a podcast. This will almost be the first year anniversary. For October 2020 will be the anniversary, but just trying to make all this information clear and accessible to individuals so that they can take action. And through my experiences in this platform, I've really been using a virtual format in order to do this. And with Youth Action on Climate Change, in fact, in the past couple of months, originally we had been very hands-on in-person events, but then over the summer we had to transition to a virtual format. And we were doing things like weekly media club with our youth, where we would give them videos and articles and things like that about an issue, and then we would come onto a Zoom call, and then we would have discussions about it and try to build solutions, and then try to take action in our own lives from this new normal that we're now living in. And so that required a lot of shifting online. And so through these experiences, I've really learned what it means to build a community online. And so I just wanted to share some key things that I've learned through my process the past few years on building an online community, because as we're going forward, and even right now, people are realizing how critical it is to have a strong online presence. And we don't know how long that we are going to be required to be online, or maybe potentially in the future, this is the way that we are going to be shaping communities. It's really critical to have these perspectives and these skills so that you know how to build strong online communities. And so I really just wanted to share 3 key things with all of you that I have learned through my experiences for building a strong online community that has a sense of place, that has that sense of connection and motivation to create change. So the first one that I wanted to talk about would be creating a branding or a unique characteristic for yourself, especially right now for students. We are just bombarded by everything being online. School's online, all these events are happening online. We have to connect with our friends online. There's a lot, and it can just be overwhelming, and it can seem like the same old thing every single day. So if you want to attract someone to your platform that's online, you need to make it stand out in some form. So maybe it's what your value is, it's what your missions are, it's the layout of your site or whatever sort of platform you're using. it's the content that you're providing. You want it to be unique, and you want it to reflect something that you are passionate about, so that you really want to be putting that content out into the world. And if someone were to speak about your platform, whatever it may be, they can clearly define it to someone else and say, this is why you should follow this platform, or this is why you should go to their site, or whatever it may be. You want people to know you for that specific thing. So for myself, that is creating this clear, understandable, and relevant understanding of climate change, and then applying that to your everyday life in simple, easy, affordable, and accessible ways. So particularly marketing it to students who feel like they don't have a lot of control and a lot of power in their life. It really shows them that they can make a change with what they have. Then the second thing I wanted to talk about when you're creating an online community is you need to have a sense of reliability or a sense of consistency. So let's say you want to create a blog, or you want to create some sort of website, and when you first launch it, you are posting all this amazing content on the site, on your relevant social media accounts, whatever it may be, and then there's a lag, and maybe you have creative block, maybe you just run out of ideas, or there's some technical issues, or whatever it may be. If you stop posting, if you almost have an absence in your community, you are going to lose your following, or they will feel less attached. And so if you want to create that sense of place and connection, you need to be consistent with what it is that you're putting out there. So as much as you may desire to put all your amazing ideas out at once, it's really much more beneficial to space it out, create a schedule for yourself, and make it very consistent in that manner. So for myself, that might mean posting a blog post once a week on a Friday, and then posting a podcast episode once a week on a Tuesday, or something like that. And if you are planning on taking breaks, just making that apparent to your audience, and maybe even referring them to other relevant sources of information so that they can still stay engaged with the topic that you are sharing. So for me, that might mean sharing other organizations that are doing similar action to me, who then, when I come back from my break, can share my platform and say, hey, they're back, and make sure you go check them out. And then the third thing that I wanted to bring up when you're creating a virtual community in this way is to really have participatory opportunities. So a community is a two-way street, really. You are giving information to someone, and you also want to be accepting information from them. So on my platform, I like to put out podcasts and blog posts for individuals and social media posts to deliver information, but then I also like to hear from my audience. I want to know what they think about the information that I'm putting out. I want them to share their stories. I want them to feel like we are establishing a relationship, a friendship. It's not just me being an informer and them being the listener. It's really creating that sense of connection and that sense of community. And so I encourage people to respond to me by putting questions in my podcast episodes, or putting them in the blog post, or creating forms where people can fill them out and submit their ideas, or even creating opportunities for guest posts. So maybe sharing someone else's story, or allowing them to write a blog post, or interviewing individuals. That's something that I love to do on the podcast. I'll bring on other young entrepreneurs that are creating change in the climate action space, just so they can share their story and build that stronger sense of community. And even another thing that I've gotten into recently at the university is mentoring opportunities. So if you feel like you have great experiences that you could share with other individuals, create some sort of mentorship opportunity where you can work personally one-on-one with an individual who wants to learn more and wants to grow skills that you possess. And then you can establish that relationship while also helping them build their skills, and then in the broader scale, create stronger community action, because then you have more individuals that are empowered and equipped with the skills you need to create change. So just to summarize again, the 3 skills, or the 3 things that you need to consider that I would recommend when building virtual communities is to create a unique sense of branding or a unique look, creating reliability and consistency in the content that you're putting out, and then creating plenty of opportunities for participation.
That's great, Jenna. Thank you. So I think, that leads into, I think this concept of town and gown is very much a two-way street. It is a connection that needs to be built between the various actors in our communities. And you need to keep up and maintain that relationship. And I think Bradley mentioned that in the first part of his presentation on how complex it is to build that relationship between 10 mayors and councils. But now we'll switch over to Kathryn, I think, from Guelph, which may provide a little bit of a different perspective, but maybe also some lessons we've heard previously.
Right, thanks, AJ. And thanks to all of everyone who's here so far. These have been great tidbits of information as I jot notes down, and I can see other people jotting down too. So thanks so much for giving so much to the conversation. A little bit about myself. I started at the University of Guelph in 2003 as a neighborhood relations coordinator, and my career path stayed along that line, and I got involved in the Town and Gown Association of Ontario when it started out in 2006, and have made some changes within my department, and now in a director role and still very connected to neighborhood relations and community relations, and also involved in the International Town and Gown Association, which although international is largely based in the US, so I'll just put that notation on it. In hearing everything that's been said, I think it might, I'll speak to some themes that I see in talking about Places Matter and the community and the connection. And Landon, when you talked about, was it communities, cities, you've got corporations, there's a fourth in there, but all those C's and pulling people together. I think common theme that I see in that is really it's about relationship building. So whether you're in person or you're online, it's that relationship building. And when Jenna spoke about, if you're online and how do you maintain that relationship and being consistent in doing that and building a brand and creating visibility. And then there's that lot of very practical on the ground work in neighborhood relations of the town and gown communities, and making sure you have community members and neighborhood residents involved in those, that it's not that ivory tower concept of we're responsive to town and gown, but we're the only ones involved in it, and making sure that the community is a part of that as well, and city councilors and leaders of neighborhood groups. And then with that relationship building, the visibility component is there, and I think that's been touched on a lot. And I think responsiveness, going back to what Brad was saying in the beginning of, you want to be present, but you have to know when to step back. You have to know when to be responsive. And I think there's some really practical examples of that. And I know that AJ had mentioned that some folks attending today might be interested in hearing about the party registration program at the University of Guelph, where students register their parties with us in advance. They come onto campus, they participate in an education session with our staff, bylaw officers, police officers involved in that, and how that works. So happy to talk about that more during the back and forth in the panel. And then bringing it all together, the collaborative component. So I've mentioned that already, but I think that collaboration is key in making everything work. So you have to be open to it being a two-way street, a multi-way street, a lot of relationship building with everybody. And I'll close out actually with one Guelph example, because I noticed that there was a question in the chat that I'm sure we'll get to in the panel discussion. But essentially, how do you get students involved and engaged in their community? And I think that everybody here probably has some perspective on that. And I'm just going to give a current example in Guelph, because we are in a time where we're more online, we're in that virtual world. That's how students are connecting. And usually at Guelph, it would have been last Saturday, we have an event called Project Serve, where every students are given the opportunity to come for a day and get some experiential learning with a nonprofit in the community. They take a bus out to that location, they volunteer, they participate for a couple of hours, they come back, they talk about that experience and integrate it into their world a little more through that discussion, and talk about how they can continue to be connected and contribute to the community. And we weren't able to do that in that hands-on way this year. But what was fascinating is that the team leading that actually set the event up online as a whole week, where there were opportunities for students to learn about volunteering. There were opportunities where they actually could come on with a nonprofit, a community agency. And the community agency spoke about there are some really practical things you can do online. There was one agency that said, you know what, we need instructions for how to cook meals for our residents, and we need those with photos. And that's something that you can do at home, and you can make such a big difference in the work that we do with our residents. So I think that the comment, and I'm not sure which panelist it came from, or maybe it actually was you, AJ, in the introduction of, there are these opportunities to do things in new ways. And to Landon, you were talking about, everybody's schedule is disrupted. And so, we're all doing things differently. So it's this opportunity where you get out of your routine and you get out of your norm, and you can try things in new ways. And lots of us are offering things in new ways. And I think that we see students taking us up on that. And I talk about that from a university perspective. But I also think our neighborhood residents are keen to do that too, when I talk about University of Guelph and neighborhood relations, and the material that they have written for us for our website and posts that we send out to students, and key messages that they've become a part of our communication, consultation, in a sense of how we work with students. So I'll close it out with that, trying to bring a little bit of it together and pass it back to you, AJ.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Kathryn. And we've gotten a few questions now in the chat here. So I think what we'll do is I'll moderate this discussion, but feel free to go open mic and jump in where you think it may be appropriate. But we'll start with some of the earlier questions here. So we kind of got two very similar questions around ideas for students to engage in their community. And so I think, Town and Gown is more than just, I think, some of the issues that get brought up around party registration and housing and unsanctioned street gatherings. There's also a very positive side of Town and Gown. So I'm wondering, Brad or Kathryn, is there any sort of program you want to mention at Brock or Guelph on the work integrated learning side, or the Brock Cares program, for example, Brad?
Yeah, I'll jump in first, and Kathryn, please feel free at any point. I mean, I think fundamental student development theory it kind of emphasizes the idea of a two-way street. It's both the time and energy that students dedicate to their learning experiences outside the classroom, but it's also the effort that the university makes to meet them halfway and kind of set them up for success. And really, if you extend that beyond kind of the traditional campus example into the community, it's that two-way street. And so the idea of engaging the community, the way that we approach at Brock is it starts early. Kathryn mentioned the Project Serves, and the Brock equivalent of that would be our Brock Cares program. Again, taking it virtual this year, it's not the same, large scale, hundreds of students out volunteering on a Saturday sort of thing, but it is very much still focused on hundreds and hundreds of students involved in virtual ways, learning about, from a thematic perspective, some of the issues that aren't just localized to the Niagara community, but maybe and most likely are relevant to them wherever they might be engaging with us from across the globe. And so, thinking about food security, thinking about climate change, thinking about indigenization, all these different issues that we tied into our Brock Cares model this year because we had some space to do things differently. And again, the idea that we want students to get into the habit of, of volunteerism and seeing themselves as part of this new community. But then in the context of the pandemic, we didn't want to lose track of the fact that their community, although it will soon come to be Niagara, and for some who relocated, it is Niagara, we didn't want to lose track of the fact that, their sense of place for the front part of the fall anyway was going to be a little bit different, and we needed to kind of flex to that change. So just a Brock example, and I'm sure Kathryn has others that she might tie in, but again, not to lose track of this idea that engagement isn't kind of a one side or the other. You need to meet in the middle. The role of the university is critical there.
That's great. And Kathryn, anything to add on that side of things from the university perspective?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that just with current environment is recognizing that right now, to be able to offer opportunities for students to get involved is great in the community where the institution is or where you're located. But I think it's equally important to recognize that a lot of students right now are not laying their head at night in the same community where their institution may be, and that encouraging involvement no matter where they are and offering, whether it's seminars or, working with a peer helper on campus to make a connection with the community where they're spending more of their time, that that seeing that develop when they are back in the community, that community engagement anywhere will have a positive effect and a positive impact when students are on campus in their post-secondary institutions. So I think for folks here who may be in the community, that right now, if you're involved in an organization that may have students, participants, in person at different times, and you're recognizing that you don't just need Western students, that students who are in London right now, who are at other institutions could be your audience right now too, and that you have the opportunity to have an impact across communities.
Yeah, that's great, Kathryn. And one of the things that struck me about this, so there's this university side of things that I think has gotten quite large now, and universities are recognizing, and colleges, on work integrated learning and going out in the community and getting involved in these things. But Landon, I kind of want to go back to our days at the Ontario Undergrad Student Alliance and talk about maybe something that's a bit broader than a local community relationship, but does affect local communities. And so, Landon, are there any insights you want to share about, your time of, maybe going beyond the four walls of Western and the University Students' Council?
Yeah. I think there's one thing that I look back on my time in student government that I wish we had done a little bit differently, and that's bring in some of the principles that have made our marketing business so effective, and that's that the strategies that we're using to engage students from coast to coast are so peer-to-peer driven, and that's what's kind of separating us in the marketing space. And so something I wish I had worked with our institution at Western and other institutions in discussing was how do we lead programming efforts and specifically off-campus programming efforts from a stronger peer perspective. So for example, some of these programs that Kathryn and Bradley have mentioned, if we were to promote some of those things from not through university channels, but through student channels, how much more effective would those programs have been in terms of attendance and participation? So, one of the things that we stand on in our business is that it's always going to be more effective to sell or to engage or to build a meaningful relationship with a young person if it's coming from another young person who they trust and have a relationship with. And so I realize that this is harder said than done, but Jenna had pointed out very accurately earlier that, we're being bombarded by thousands of digital ads through every medium that young people are engaging with. And so to cut through that is becoming increasingly more challenging. But I think the best way to do that is just through other students. And so, if universities are working with student leaders on campus and those that students that have a real presence on campus, these students can be vehicles to engage the rest of their peers, whether it be in their program or their social circles, the athletic community, etc. And so I want to do more thinking on this, but I think there's a big way for PSC institutions to start tapping into using students on campus, using is the wrong word, collaborating with students on campus to show their peers that there's other things out there beyond the four walls that you've said.
Yeah, and that's great. And Jenna, I'm struck by thinking back to when you first started at Waterloo and that transition into the Waterloo community. And Landon talking about, the promotion of getting out around town. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience in kind of getting 2 feet landed in Kitchener and Waterloo and exploring, and how, maybe students helped you as well as some municipal programming.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think just as a disclaimer, my experience is a little bit different than the average person because I'm someone who's very I want to learn as much as I can right now. I want to get as exposed to the community as I can. And so I was one of those individuals in first year who was finding my way around uptown Waterloo and downtown Kitchener when some of my friends hadn't even left campus until the first few weeks were over. But to really set my foot in the ground and get a sense of the community, it took a lot of reaching out to those upper year students, like Landon mentioned, building those peer-to-peer connections. So I remember in first year, there was a peer mentorship opportunity. And so I took part in that. And I had an upper year student who acted as my buddy and said, if we want to go to coffee shops, or if you want to volunteer in some local charities, we can do it together and we can go to this place, or I can give you recommendations. Or getting involved in the student societies on campus. That was something that I started out early in my university degree, and it really acquainted me with the different opportunities, not just on campus to get involved, but also the connections that the campus had to other community organizations. So I think it really did come down to making connections with those upper year students who had that experience already, so I could early on build my understanding of the community and feel like I was well integrated into the community. And so I think, as Landon mentioned, having those opportunities to connect with students, to I don't want to say using them as a marketing tool, but it really does make the difference, because we do have this advertising fatigue, or we have this internet fatigue right now, where there's just so much being sent to us that no one is really looking at ads, or they're not looking at events that are going on. They're just scrolling and scrolling. But if you have a friend who is a part of these events going on, or these community organizations, you are much more likely to look at what it is that they are a part of if they sent it to you directly, or if you're in a group chat with friends or a student council, or you are in a student coffee shop or a lounge or something like that, and you see a poster put up by one of your friends. If it's something they're involved with, you're much more likely to get involved in that. So finding those connections with your peers, you know almost that the organization or the event or whatever is legitimate, and you know that there is a place for students to be involved because one of your peers is involved, and it makes you feel more comfortable being involved in that. So that goes back to what AJ, you asked about how to get integrated. It's about feeling comfortable and knowing that students are welcomed in that environment, I would say.
Yeah, and that's great, Jenna. And I think it's also brought up from my own first year experience, saying, remember the wonderful world of Waterloo event, which I think, Jenna, you also did in your first year, where they took us into Uptown Waterloo. And you think through, some of these programs happen in certain schools. I know downtown Guelph, they sometimes do stuff to draw students into the downtown area. And Brad, I know you've been working quite closely with St. Catharines and Thorold on thinking through how can we get students into the core areas. And, I think it's not something that happens overnight, and there has to be continuous effort there on that front. And so speaking from the London perspective, there's been a lot of conversation here around downtown London and what it means to go south of Queen for an undergrad student. And I think, there's many things to offer in this city, and it's going to take a lot to work together and build that up. And so I think many of the speakers today have shared those thoughts around this is a continuous ongoing thing that needs to be worked at in order to create benefits for everyone involved. But pivoting now to COVID a bit, because we're running short on time here, and I do want to get to this question because, Kathryn, we had a really interesting conversation earlier in the week about Guelph's experience with the online programming and primarily being an online only campus. Could you share a little bit more about how that online programming has gone?
Sure, and I think Brad at Brock has had a similar experience for us, and I'm guessing probably similar at Western too, although I think there are more students in the Western community and on-campus than we have on ours right now. But during our orientation week, I think, so much is about what we call a week, and that transition to being a Griffin at the University of Guelph, and that experience. And if you're on campus during that week, there's just thousands of students everywhere and so many different activities. And this year, we hosted that as well as our summer transition programming all online. And we had over 600 events that we hosted during our orientation week, and we had phenomenal attendance. In a lot of cases, we had higher attendance than we would have in person. And what we found is students just really wanted to engage. They wanted to find connections. Often at the start of a presentation or a session held by a student organization, it was how do I make friends? How do I meet people? How do I connect? And over the summer, we hosted weekly live sessions about the transition to university. And some of those sessions it's phenomenal to us, but had attendance of over 1,000 students at those live events in the middle of a Thursday afternoon each week. And then some, like our lower numbers on those were about 300, and that's still pretty phenomenal. If we were hosting events on campus in the summer, that students need to come to. You know, we're looking at 100 people or less for some of those smaller transition events. So students were really looking to engage. What we have seen though is that numbers have decreased for sure once classes started. So it's going to be really interesting this year in the trends to see at what points are students really tapping in and really engaged, and when are they transitioning and really focusing on their academics, and how do we reach out to them to ensure that when they're focusing on their academics, they have the supports they need.
Yeah, that's great. And Brad, would you like to add anything on, you know, the Brock experience you've seen with going online and creating that community?
I would say we've had a similar experience to the one that Kathryn described at Guelph, but I might just highlight where I think there was a significant amount of student energy through the midsummer and into the early fall, which is around academic preparedness and academic readiness. And so I think it was shared in the chat to the group that BU Free framework, and I would highlight the BU 101 example, because we were very surprised to see the kind of early points in the summer where students were engaged in that thinking about, how do I learn online? And again, I don't know if that's a reflection on how, you know, the high school year finished, or if it's just, you know, that natural kind of anticipation for, you know, for university that got students to kind of focus on academic preparedness, you know, when the summer was still, you know, still unfolding. But we saw just huge numbers of students engaged in that BU 101 program, which was entirely co-curricular. Although what we also found as the summer continued and that momentum started to increase, that we had a lot of the large first-year classes and even second and third-year classes who began to integrate that BU 101 programming into their academic courses for incremental academic credit. And so it goes back to that comment I made at the front end around currency, which is, you know, we need to respect students' time. As has been mentioned lots of times this morning, they're pulled in all these different directions, and there's a whole lot of noise. So if we can, you know, recognize the effort that it takes to be involved, and then give credit for, credit in every sense of the word, for the steps that students are taking, and to do that early, I think that reinforces, you know, the value of engagement, whether it's academic or co-curricular. So yeah, I think one of the things that COVID has done is it's changed the way that we are engaging the students. It's changed the timelines that we're doing it on, and it's given a lot more flexibility, I think, to allow students to engage in ways that make sense for them in the moment. So you know, those are all fundamentals that we need to make sure are retained as we shift back towards more in-person operation. I think that's really, you know, to just finalize the point, that's really the only respectful way to approach the student experience, and that's to make it authentic for students. They can pick and choose the way that they get involved in ways that make sense for them, and we provide lots of different ways for that to happen. So again, I think that there's silver linings here. It's not been easy for anyone, but the effort that everyone is putting in is going to pay dividends, not just in getting us through this challenging time, but when we come out on the other side too.
Yeah, and Brad, I think that's a good point on, you know, as we work towards going back to in-person, what lessons have we taken away from all of this? And I think there's some really good lessons on recognizing that we need to maintain constant contact with people, and that even though they may be virtual, we still need to build a community around it. And what can we do in sparking that community of wanting to be here in London, or wanting to be in Guelph, and wanting to be in Niagara region. And I think that's what we've seen here in London, at least, where, you know, we're upwards of 90% of students are choosing to return to the city and are thinking through, you know, what they value is being able to live here in London. And it's less so the fact that they're just going to Western and so that they need somewhere to sleep. It's more they're here at Western, but they're also here in London. And so moving forward, I would be remiss not to remind ourselves that today would have been likely another unsanctioned street gathering on Broughdale. And it seems all is quiet up there at the moment, and I'm hoping that stays that way throughout this weekend and the weeks to come. And I think Western students have definitely stepped up in recent weeks after our unfortunate outbreak. But I think one of the things that I'm taking away from all of this is over the next year, we're going to have to continue to work hard on these relationships. And I think, Landon, you've brought up an excellent point on the role of private enterprise here and companies in this space, particularly the small and medium enterprises. And I think, you know, maybe a solution for some of the more negative aspects of this town and gown relationship can be addressed through, thinking through how we can collaborate with our private partners to provide exciting opportunities for students to engage with their community rather than just making their own way, let's say. So with that, folks, I want to thank you all for attending, and I'd like to thank Jenna, Landon, Bradley, and Kathryn for joining us this morning. And thank you to everyone who attended today. The recording should be available later if you'd like to tell your friends about this. And I'd just like to give a shout out to the Town and Gown Association of Ontario. We are currently undergoing a refresh, let's say, and we took, as Brad said, when things are going well, take a step back. And we took a slight step back and are looking forward to take a very large step forward in the coming weeks and months. So please check us out at tjo.ca and connect with us on Twitter at Town and Gown Ontario. And feel free to email us at info@tjo.ca. And so thank you all for joining us, and we wish you a lovely rest of your morning or afternoon, wherever you're located.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.